Good morning. Welcome back to the broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder. This is BRN AM for Thursday, November 4th, 2021. And our top stories today: non-traditional workers lack access to workplace retirement savings, and can they improve the retirement outlook by coordinating with partners? Well, joining me now to discuss this and a lot more, John Scott is the Project Director of Retirement Savings at the Pew Charitable Trust. John, great to see you again. Thanks so much for joining us on the program this morning.
Jeff, great to see you. Thank you for having me.
It's always great to talk about the wonderful research that the Pew team is doing, and specifically around retirement savings. John, you recently released you and the Pew team, I should say, recently released research around non-traditional workers, and I want to get into that with respect to retirement outlook. But first, who is a non-traditional worker?
That is a great question, and I think there's been a lot of debate over what is a non-traditional worker, sometimes called contingent worker or independent worker. Basically, these are workers that don't have a traditional employer-employee relationship, or sometimes called a W-2 relationship. So that covers a lot of workers out there, from independent contractors, sole proprietors, gig workers, which we've heard a lot about, temp staff. So really runs the gamut across a wide variety of situations. And in our own research, in the survey that we conducted of non-traditional workers, we sort of probed a little bit more deeply to try and understand the nature of the work. And specifically, a lot of folks have multiple jobs now. And what we found in our survey research, when looking at non-traditional work, about 37% said they just have one job that's non-traditional in nature, so maybe like a sole proprietor. 40% have a mix of traditional work, like a Pew employee, but also has a non-traditional side job, like freelancing on the side. And then you have about, the remainder or so have multiple jobs that are non-traditional in nature. So that's where you have someone who's an independent contractor, but they're doing some freelancing and maybe some gig work on the side. So the point is, there's a wide variety of work relationships that are going on out there that we found in our survey.
John, we hear about supply chain issues, we hear about labor shortages, all of that relates to inflation and prices. But since the launch of the pandemic, or since the pandemic began, have we now seen more non-traditional workers than we had pre-pandemic?
I think that's a really great question, because and I'm not talking about Pew, but researchers generally have tried to really pin down the scope and nature of non-traditional work. And different surveys, different data sets, different ways of asking the question have come up with widely different estimates, even before the pandemic. And they range from 5% of the workforce to 40% of the workforce were engaged in non-traditional work. So that's a huge variability out there. Now, in terms of the pandemic, it makes sense that we'd see a spike in non-traditional work just through the sheer, numbers of millions of people that have lost their jobs during the pandemic. I don't think the data is in yet, but I will say in our survey, we did ask a question, has the pandemic affected your work? And we found that 40% said that their hours were reduced because of the pandemic. 5% of non-traditional workers said they lost their jobs, but 16% said their hours actually went up during the pandemic, which also makes sense. So I think we will see an increase in non-traditional work. Maybe another question might be, will that increase last post-pandemic? But we'll see.
I guess we can only say time will tell with regards to that last question. But John, why does, I should say, the retirement outlook suffer for these non-traditional workers?
Yeah, I think it's a really key question. It's really the one that motivated our research. I think basically, you could think about it as, do people want to save, and do they have the opportunity to save? So is it demand, or is it really a question of access? We do know access is probably the major barrier to savings. 46% of non-traditional workers in our survey said that they don't have access to a retirement plan through any job that they have, and only a little more than 20% are actually participating in some sort of workplace-based retirement plan. So I think really the key issue is providing access to these workers. We can get into some issues about whether they want to save, though.
Yeah, and that was you segued really nicely, John. Do these folks, from your research, look, I think just anecdotally, I talk to people all the time, and I think people always want to do the right thing. They want to save, they want to have good retirement outcomes, but things get in the way. So I'll just ask you blankly, do these individuals who are non-traditional workers want to save for their financial futures and their retirement?
I think the general answer is yes. I mean, as I'm sure you know, there's a lot of variation in people's situations, financial and household and other situations. But when we posed the question to those non-traditional workers that said they didn't have any workplace retirement plan, 77% said yes, they would like to save for retirement. And so I think that's a fairly strong indicator of the demand. Now, we do have some research that's just coming out that indicates there are some barriers even beyond that initial demand. So for example, the number one barrier for a lot of folks, and this is not going to be a big surprise to you or your listeners, but the lack of disposable income was cited as the number one barrier to saving. So, it's a bit of a chain logic here that you have to first provide access, you have to get people motivated, and then they have to sort of figure out, how it makes sense for their own household budget. But I think going back to the original question, yes, I think people understand that they need to save and that they do want to save, and it's really putting them in the position so they can do that.
John, when we last had you on several months ago, we talked about some of these state-run plans, and they are an alternative to some of these workplace retirement plans that non-traditionals, that workers may not have access to for a variety of reasons. Are you seeing more alternatives pop up in this area to workplace retirement savings plans?
Well, I think that first of all, especially for non-traditional workers, there are a number of options out there that you can set up an IRA, of course, there's a solo 401k, there's a wide variety of, federally blessed or qualified retirement options for non-traditional workers that are available. And then you mentioned the state auto IRA programs. So I think that there are a number of alternatives that are in place or in process of being developed. I mean, we could get into a whole discussion about fintech apps and other sort of interventions like that as well. So, but I think it's really, how do we get these people to take advantage of these options and get them saving and saving consistently is really the key issue.
Yeah, and that's a perfect segue. We're going to go to a quick commercial break. When we come back, we'll talk to John about providing access to non-traditional workers to help improve their retirement outlook. You're going to want to stay tuned right here on BRN AM. Imagine a new television network that will make you richer, healthier, and in control of your financial future. This network is for the policewoman in Nashville, Tennessee, the baker in Dubuque, Iowa, the teacher in Lexington, Kentucky. We want to make the idea of savings and retirement culturally relevant. But what do you see as a defining issue of the midterms, especially for the smaller businesses? I mean, they are the lifeblood of the American economy. Featuring exclusive interviews, current affairs, and docuseries. 33 years old, you retired early.
The philosophy is money only matters if it helps you live a life that you love.
But you got to start thinking about retirement as soon as you get in.
The Broadcast Retirement Network will drive very high engagement with premium partnerships. So this isn't retirement and savings for your parents or grandparents. This is for all Americans. And we're going to change the way you think about money. Welcome to the next frontier of retirement and savings. This is BRN, the Broadcast Retirement Network.
Are you stuck with a low credit score? A credit report and score that's causing you to be denied credit or pay higher interest rates than others for the same things? Then do what Terrence did and call Credit Repair for your free credit evaluation to help restore your credit.
I started thinking about buying a new house, and my score wasn't where I needed it to be. I called and spoke with one of the representatives, and we just had a good conversation, and I liked what he was saying.
Just one call for his free credit evaluation was all it took to start back on the track to repairing his credit.
I'm seeing the deletions and I'm getting the report, so I know something's being done. It does make a difference to me.
All it takes is one call to get started.
Credit Repair has given me a second chance to have a better credit score.
Don't let a low credit score hold you back another day. Do what Terrence did and make the call for your free credit evaluation.
Call 800-819-4152. That's 800-819-4152. Again, 800-819-4152.
Welcome back. We're talking this morning to John Scott of the Pew Charitable Trust. John, thanks so much for staying with us this morning.
Thank you, Jeff. It's great to be here.
So John, we kind of set this up and defined who these workers are. How can non-traditional workers improve their retirement outlook going forward?
Well, I think there are some interesting questions here. One way that they could do that is to, and this is sort of one of the more interesting research questions that we had in the project, was thinking about this at a household level. So, you might sort of say, if you're in a household with either a spouse or a partner, I'm going to be the entrepreneur. I'm going to be a sole proprietor and set up my own business. But you, my spouse or partner, are going to have the W-2 job that has the health insurance and the retirement benefits. And we're going to think about this in terms at the household level. And that was really one of the key questions that I wanted to answer in this survey was, just because of the nature of this work, are they thinking a little bit differently about benefits and wages and work? The short answer is that that didn't really seem to have a big effect on retirement coverage of those non-traditional workers that are in a coupled relationship. Only about 1 in 4 got their retirement benefits through a spouse or partner. And so extrapolating that to the whole population of non-traditional workers, that only resulted in just over a 10% increase in retirement coverage. And what's just to add a little bit more flavor to that, we asked a number of questions about coordinating, household decision-making or knowledge about retirement planning. And, many non-traditional workers are not coordinating with their spouse or partners. And in fact, only about 10%, or I'm going to say 10% of non-traditional workers don't even know if their spouse or partner has a retirement plan. So, we don't see the household approach being a big impact for non-traditional workers. So we have to go back to some of these other solutions that I'm sure we're going to talk about.
And it sounds to me, John, before we go on to the next question, that there's a real educational opportunity when you say that some people are not even aware of the benefits that their spouse or their partner, may or not have. That leads me to think, hey, someone needs to be educating these people. Maybe it's their employer. Someone needs to be telling them what benefits they have so they can put money away and have access.
Yeah, I agree. And, part of the issue may be that maybe people get partnered or married or live together that are sort of similar, that they both have jobs that don't have retirement benefits. And so it sort of reinforces maybe that lack of knowledge. And we do know that when someone has a retirement plan, this is prior research we did a while ago, they are much more likely to engage in retirement planning because employers often provide tools and education around retirement and how to save. So I think that the fact that the lack of access, it does have a direct impact on lack of savings, but also has an impact, I think, indirectly on education. So trying to solve this riddle is really an opportunity. If we can provide access to them, we can provide access to not just retirement plans, but also education.
Well, John, education is important, but what about if I do not have a partner? I don't have a spouse. I don't have someone that I'm living with, someone that I can rely on for access to benefits.
Yeah, and this I think is even beyond just not having a partner. We said even if you do have a partner, it's really not a great avenue for retirement plan coverage. So what can that individual worker do? I'm sure we can get into some specific policy ideas in a second, but just focusing on the individual and just going beyond education, which I think is limited in terms of its impact and reach. I think there are a couple of issues, especially that are especially pertinent to non-traditional workers. We know that things like automatic enrollment work in the private sector, and these state programs are also using automatic enrollment. But how do you automatically enroll a sole proprietor or some other non-traditional worker? So we have to sort of figure out some of those technical details of using these very useful tools. One option might be that, whether it's a state or maybe an employer that's contracting with a worker, we use something called active choice. This has been shown in the research to have some effect, where you just present the choice, yes or no. Would you want to start having a portion of your pay deducted and put into an IRA? So I think we have to sort of think about the behavioral side of this a little bit, be a little creative. I think the other side of it is understanding how people get paid and how do we deduct 5% of pay in some of these more unusual settings. So when I bought a house, I had a check made out to the real estate agent for their commission. Where in that process do we deduct that money and get it into the IRA? Especially, this is only a few years ago, it was a paper check. So, how do we do some of these more technical things? And they get into the weeds, but they do have a big impact on behavior. So, don't have any clear answers as of yet. That's something we hope to get into in the future with this research as a springboard, but there are key questions.
Yeah, and as I mentioned before at the end of the first segment, we talked about MEPs, PEPs, auto IRA programs. Policymakers, they are not blind to what is needed here. There is a focus among policymakers and regulators and people within the industry, including yourself, around addressing these issues. What do you believe, what does the Pew team believe policymakers should be thinking about when they're thinking about crafting new legislation and new ideas?
Yeah, well, I think number one is we need more research, and that's of course coming from a researcher. That's what I'm going to say, but I think we really need to sort of target our thinking and our research in ways to test out some of these ideas. So state auto IRAs, we'll just focus on that, but you could think about this with PEPs and other tools or solutions that are out there. But just thinking about state auto IRAs, so Oregon is going to go down to one employee firms, effectively self-employed people. How is that going to play out? So we'll learn something from that process when they're fully implemented, I think sometime next year, and we'll get some learnings from that. But I think you really have to go out there and meet the people where they are and understand, well, how do people really get paid? How do they feel about having maybe money deducted out of their bank account instead of a regular paycheck? Maybe it's 5% coming out of their bank account. And how do you automatically enroll them, or something like active choice that I mentioned? How might that work in that situation? Maybe it's something entirely different. Maybe we go through the tax system, and when they're filing their quarterly returns, maybe there's an opportunity there for that active choice. Do you want a portion of your money to go into an IRA that we'll set up for you, by the way? So I think we do have to be a little bit more creative with our policy solutions, informed by research and informed by what people are telling us in terms of what will work for them. We know the demand is there, but we just have to figure out some of these smaller details around behavior and sort of the mechanics of moving money around.
John, this one's out of left field, but I'm going to bring it up anyway. When you look around the globe, and you're very knowledgeable about other retirement systems and some of the challenges they face, is this an issue that is similar to any other country, any other nation that has a retirement system with non-traditional workers?
I think it is. I mean, I don't know the data about other countries and their non-traditional workforce, and obviously different countries, different cultures, different labor laws all come into play. So those caveats aside, we do know the world is moving towards more of a savings-based system and away from that promised benefit of a DB or pension system. We do know that people work in a wide variety of ways, and they get paid in a wide variety of ways, even in the industrialized societies. So I think these issues will resonate and do resonate in other countries. And I think it is going to be an ongoing issue because there are a lot of people who are working, outside of maybe the mainstream labor structures that we have in place today. So yes, I think it's very relevant globally.
Yeah, and lots of lessons to be learned from the U.S. and probably a lot of lessons to be learned elsewhere. John Scott, great research. Always great chatting with you. Learned a lot today, and we look forward to having you back on the program again very soon.
Thanks, Jeff. Great to see you and great to talk to you.
That wraps up this episode of BRN AM. Have a topic of interest, someone you think we should talk to, drop us a line. And don't forget, for all the information in retirement markets, technology, personal finance, so much more, check out today's edition of our daily newsletter, The Morning Pulse. We're back again tomorrow. Until then, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.
Are you being audited and do you owe the IRS $10,000 or more in back taxes? Is the IRS threatening to take more of your money? Don't fight the IRS alone. The Tax Doctor is here to help you negotiate your tax bill and reduce your stress. The IRS can freeze your assets and seize your bank accounts, but you can stop these IRS actions. The Tax Doctor will work with you using our years of experience to represent your case to help you get the best resolution under the IRS guidelines. Help is here to deal with the IRS to reduce your stress. We've handled thousands of cases, so we know what we're doing. If you owe $10,000 or more in back taxes, do not call the IRS alone. Call a Tax Doctor now for a tax emergency analysis.
Call 800-224-6439.